This is video lecture number 5 on John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. This particular lecture is going to do a little bit of refreshing since it's been a little while since I posted the last lecture, but it's also going to introduce and extend a couple themes that are going to be relevant to what Mill has to say, especially in chapter 5, where we kind of see On Liberty and Mill's political philosophy and social philosophy kind of on full display. If you remember, Mill defends early on in On Liberty what he calls one very simple principle that is neither one nor simple. It is the principle that it is a morally justifiable reason to limit someone's liberty to prevent them from harming others, and there's no other justification for limiting someone's liberty. So Mill has a very, very narrow recognition of when it is morally permissible to limit someone's liberty, either by the use of the law or by what he calls the moral coercion of public opinion. In any case, the only valid liberty limiting principle for Mill is the harm principle, nothing else. Because of that, Mill recognizes, as you'll recall, an almost absolute right to freedom of expression, certainly to what he calls the inward dimensions of consciousness, with respect to freedom of thought, but probably some other stuff as well. What we see starting in chapter 3 of On Liberty is Mill kind of wondering about whether what he says about free speech and free expression, on the one hand, can be extended to free action. So we see early on, Mill's going to kind of ask us this quote, ask us to consider. Let us examine whether the same reasons that require freedom of opinion do not require that men should be free to act upon their opinions. And the interesting thing is, Mill seems to think that the answer here is, well, no. And by the way, no one, apparently, pretends that actions should be as free as opinions. Even opinions lose their immunity when the circumstances in which they are expressed are such as to constitute their expression a positive instigation to some mischievous act. Mill seems to have the idea of what we would call incitement here, although exactly what incitement is in the law is a bit of a tricky question, and that's something that we should probably talk about. But in any case, the idea, Mill's own example is the example of the angry mob who is gathered outside the corn dealer's house, who has hoarded corn during a particularly tough winter. Normally, it might be free to denounce the guy. Normally, it might be free to pass out placards and pamphlets. But in those circumstances, Mill sort of suggests that wouldn't be okay, precisely because your speech in those circumstances could instigate, could be a positive instigation to some mischievous act like rioting, doing damage to the guy's property or whatever. So pretty clearly, Mill is going to think there is a lesser freedom of action than there is with respect to free speech and free expression. But not to worry. Mill is still going to recognize an exceedingly strong liberty of action, very narrow circumstances in which your freedom of action can be limited, as long as you refrain from molesting others, let's say harming them, as long as you act merely according to your own inclinations, then in that case, the very same freedom that you would have to express yourself is the same degree of freedom of action that you have. Okay. Now, one of the expressions that I used last time was this reference towards experiments in living. And so this first paragraph in chapter 3 is actually a really, really important one. If you remember, Mill thinks that part of the reason we should have an absolute right to freedom of expression is because we can be wrong about things. Even when we're right about things, we might not know the whole score. We might not really know what we think we know because we lack true justified belief. But that's as true with respect to our own happiness and our interactions with others. Okay, so notice Mill starts out by saying, it is useful that while mankind are imperfect, which is of course going to be always, it is useful that there should be these experiments in living. What Mill means then is that free scope should be given to varieties of character, and more importantly, putting those varieties of character into action, so long as we're not doing injury to others, so long as we're not violating their rights. Okay? In those circumstances, where we actually let people engage in experiments in living, one of the benefits there is that they're going to have more knowledge about their own happiness. They themselves, if they simply rely on custom or normal modes of conduct and don't actually try new stuff, might not realize what exactly it is that makes them happier, makes their life go better. So as a utilitarian, we would be missing out on significant bits of utility. But note, Mill seems to think that we benefit other people as well. This goes back to Mill's stuff about utility being a concern of mankind understood as progressive beings, that is, the kind of being that can get better than they are currently here. Apparently, if we tolerate experiments in living, it's not just that we ourselves will be happier, but society, humankind, the world quite generally will be happier. What Mill really has in mind here are those brave, unique, contrarian souls that are simply unwilling to do what other people do, go forth and discover new knowledge, either theoretical knowledge or practical knowledge about happiness and what makes life go well. And to the extent that we have that knowledge and we have their example, the rest of us are better off. So this has all been kind of summary so far, but what I want to make sure that we do is sort of understand where Mill's going to, because especially in chapter 5 of On Liberty, we're going to see all of this on display. Okay? There's two maxims here, the liberty maxim and the social authority maxim, I'm calling them. These are not the terms that Mill uses, but they're nice summaries of Mill's view, and they're related to one another. According to the liberty maxim, an individual is not accountable to society for his actions insofar as these concern the interest of no one but himself. This is Mill recognizing, although he doesn't use this terminology, something like a right of privacy. If your actions interest no one but yourself, then you're not accountable to anyone. You are not blamable. You should not be punished. You should not be shamed. Neither the law nor the forces of the moral coercion of public opinion should be used against you, so long as your actions concern no one but yourself. This is Mill recognizing privacy. But the flip side of that, for such actions as are prejudicial to the interests of others, the individual is accountable. So if my actions do affect the interests of other people, now I can't claim a right to privacy anymore. And in those circumstances, I emphasize may be subjected to social or legal punishment. Note Mill says maybe here. He doesn't say we have to be. There may be good reasons for not punishing people, for not shaming them, for not doing other kinds of things to them by ways of social control. But nonetheless, according to the social authority maxim, the second my actions do affect the interests of other people, society has an interest in governing them.